Hello, everyone else. Welcome to the 8th masterclass. I hope everyone's good, enjoying the sun. We'll just feel free to turn your cameras on if you would like, and your microphones if you would like. We are recording this for the funders of the project, so just be aware of that. Or if you want to just chat in the chat, I'm going to be the middleman doing the communication. So if you've got any questions throughout this, please just, interact and ask what you need to ask. So these are a series of masterclasses for BEATKNOTS, a group that's been making an album in 3 different studios. But we have got some other people here today from outside of the project. So welcome to them too. Today's session focuses on mixing, and we'll hear a little bit from Lee in a minute. And obviously for the people working on the BEATKNOTS project, we're currently going through the mixing process of the album that we've made. So hopefully this can enlighten a little bit. And like we say, please do ask questions, because it's a lonely space for Lee there on his own without questions and interaction, but feel free to pop them in the chat or just unmute your mic. So hi Lee.
How are we doing?
Very well, very well. A little bit about you as a producer. Can you tell if no one had heard of you before, how would you speak about your work?
Okay, I've been working on music professionally for coming up to 20 years now, which is scary. I'm predominantly a producer and engineer and mix engineer, and myself and Andy run the Elementz Studios in Nottingham, which is, dare I say, one of the leading, if not the leading, kind of urban music studios in the city. And we do a lot of work with kind of developing artists that are coming through from the ground up, and then also professionals, and do quite a lot of work with record labels as well. I work in commercial music and also production music, so that includes syncing stuff for film and TV with a few of the major labels and some independents as well.
Nice. So we're in safe hands.
I hope so. Sorry.
Tiny little synopsis for everyone that's here. What we're going to look at today, and what do we hope to kind of come out with at the end? Okay,
so today I'm going to do a presentation, and it's basically going to be looking through the top down on how to mix a record. It's talking about my experiences and trying to give a few tips relating to that. We're not going into too much depth, to be honest. I just saw the bottom of your mug. I think it's got a trotter on it, or some kind of, okay, it's a pig's nostrils.
I think it's a pig.
Very nice. Okay, that's a massive distraction, but it's fine. I love it. And yeah, so we're going to be looking at some of the kind of concepts of mixing, looking a little bit at whether you're working in a room or working on headphones, how to apply certain kind of mixing conditions, things that I've come across, and then also looking at it kind of from a client basis. If you're just trying to get into mixing as a commercial engineer, some of the things that you might want to consider. All right, so welcome to the BEATKNOTS Mixing Masterclass. I hope this is of use, and feel free to jump in. Obviously, Ben said he's going to kind of mediate if anybody wants to ask any questions. I'm not sure whether I'll see the chat because I've got the presentation in front of me. So just, yeah, give me a nod, and as we go through it, please feel free to ask anything. So I'll kick off. We've got about 50 minutes to go, so let's get cracking. So first off, I'm going to start with a question. What do people think a good mix is? Any ideas? Silence. Anybody? I can hear something in the background, but not too much.
Is it,
I can't see
what a client wants.
Yep, you know what it is, bro. So basically, a good mix is what the client wants, exactly that. Obviously, you can spend hours and hours trying to, do the absolute best for the job. You can kind of impart your feel into it. But ultimately, if you're working with a client and they're paying you for the work, a mix is what they want it to be. So that's the first thing that I would say. So the second thing, which is also quite difficult, more difficult than people might imagine, is a good mix needs to beat the rough mix. Now, we'll go into that in a little bit later on. I've done a section on how to beat a rough mix, so we'll come back to that one. And it needs to be dynamically in shape for mastering. So what that basically means is you're giving people enough headroom, the mastering engineer, should I say, enough headroom for them to add their kind of sonic flavor to it and kind of expand the mix. So between 3 and 6 decibels, leaving that in terms of headroom, once you've printed your mix, is probably a good place to start. Depending on what your relationship is like with your mastering engineer, it may be that you want them to add nothing to that sonically, and you want them to kind of just prepare that ready to go for all the streaming and radio and so on and so forth. It might mean also that you would need to present a club mix, a radio mix, and possibly even a streaming mix. And there's lots of different formats that can kind of go into that. And I'm sure Andy will cover that later on when he gets into his masterclass on the mastering side of it. So basically, yeah, leaving enough space for the mastering engineer to do what they need to do. So what do we need to do before we start? So are you going to be working in headphones? Are you going to be working in a room with speakers in the traditional sense, or are you going to be working with both? So let's kick off with headphones.
Should we ask the question to the group? Should we ask, what does everyone use?
Absolutely.
Are people mainly mixing in headphones, or are people mainly mixing their stuff with speakers, either in the chat or? So Mitchell Shaw, I think it should be both. Finley, mostly speakers, but checks with headphones.
Okay, cool. All right, so this is what we're going to do. We'll cover off the headphones first, then the speakers, and then both. So Finley, I agree with you. I use a combination of speakers and headphones because it gives me the best, like, kind of dynamic range. I can check, you know, I can reference back, and it gives me all the options that I need from that point of view. So knowing your headphones is almost as important as how accurate they are. So you can go and spend a couple of grand on a pair of headphones and not really have your ears trained, and that's not going to give you any benefit whatsoever. Furthermore, most people listen back to music nowadays on earbuds and laptops. So what we need to do is make sure that we're making a mix that sounds pleasing on those headphones as well. So before you go and buy yourself an expensive pair of headphones, make sure you understand how to listen, which is this is a subject in itself. So we'll maybe talk about that later on if anybody has any questions. So yeah, mixing on headphones basically means that you can work anywhere, which is a huge advantage. And if you think about it, a lot of records these days are often mixed in bedrooms, hotels, artists that are popular. I read something on Rod Wave's release, his latest album. The whole thing was done from start to finish, recorded, arranged, produced, and mixed in headroom, in headphones, and on some really small speakers while he was on tour across America doing it in hotel rooms, basically. So it makes you versatile. You can work anywhere. So when we're considering headphones, open back ones such as the HD 800s, which are the ones in the picture here that you can see, they will help you to feel more connected to the room and less isolated in general. So keeping it simple, the difference between open and closed headphones, open and closed back headphones is, as the name suggests, if they're closed, you're closed in, you won't be able to hear anything else that's around you. So you kind of lose your spatial awareness of the room, but it'll also stop you from annoying people because they won't be able to hear anything what you're doing. Open back headphones, they do let sound out, and they also let the kind of the sonic character of the room in, which kind of helps you feel connected and less isolated. So that's open back. Choosing comfortable headphones is super, super important, for obvious reasons. If you're sitting there working on headphones for, you know, up to 8 hours a day, you don't want something that's going to hurt your ears, because that's going to be a distraction to your work. I've road tested a couple of pairs of headphones which are incredibly accurate and sound amazing, but they just felt like an aircraft pilot that's so big on my ears, just was really uncomfortable after about 10-20 minutes. So I would recommend something like the Sennheiser range. The 800s are the flagship model, and they're quite expensive, but they do a 600 and down as well in open back, which are a lot less pricey. So I would say they're pretty good headphones to kick off with. Yeah, and don't discredit the earbuds, as I said, for referencing. That's basically what a lot of your client base is going to be listening to the music on anyway, so your stuff needs to sound good on them. I wouldn't recommend necessarily mixing on them, but being back from your headphones and your speakers to the earbuds is not a bad idea at all, and it's something that I do. I've always normally got a pair when it plugged in right in front of me when I'm working on the mix. So also, furthermore, if you want to kind of enhance it, if you've got a fairly decent pair of headphones, what you can do is get correction software. So if you look at the graphic, you can see there's a purple line and a green line. And so this is Sonarworks that have put this program together. For headphones only, it's about 100 quid, which is a fair investment, but it's worthwhile. And the idea is what that will do is no matter how good or bad your headphones are, it will try to null any kind of variances in their dynamic range. And when I talk about dynamic range, that basically means that headphones sometimes, especially hi-fi ones, they will make something sound more desirable, or it will try to create like an impression of air into the sound to basically make it sound great for you as a listener. We don't want that. We want to hear exactly what the program material is. So this is something that I recommend. I use this program along with my HJ800s, and what it does is it kind of just makes the bottom end sound a little bit more accurate. With mine, the curve is very, very straight, generally speaking, and that's what you want. The line along the middle, that's the flat, that's exactly where you want it to be. And if you can see what this software does, Sonarworks have basically gone and like monitored, you know, a million different sets of headphones, and then they apply an EQ curve, which kind of it knows the differences. So it just basically shoots the opposite of what the frequency boosts and patterns are of the headphones to try and give it the most balanced output. So moving on to the room now, what is important to consider about your mix room? So I'll let that be thrown out there if anybody's got any comments. What's important if you're working from a room? Anybody at all?
Finley says treatment, so like room treatment.
Okay, cool. So speakers, this is obviously the thing that you're going to be using to listen through. Now, as you can see, there's a picture here, that's the Amphion range, and behind my head, looking like ears, basically they're a pair of the Amphions. Now, we use those because they're very professional and very accurate, but you know, it's not impossible to be mixing on speakers that aren't exactly as accurate as that. We'll get into that as we move through. So listening position and the sweet spot. So depending on the size of your room, if you look at the graphic here, you've got a 60-60-60 triangle. And if you sit yourself in the sweet spot, and you guys that have worked with the Elementz on the BEATKNOTS project, I've probably mentioned this in the past, that, you know, our sweet spot in our room is quite small. But if you're out of that sweet spot, you're going to introduce lots of issues. You won't be able to understand what the stereo information is doing. If you're too far to the back of the room, you might have kind of standing waves, which is bass. You'll get bass buildup, which is going to give you an impression that the sound is bassier than what it is, which will mean that your mix will end up sounding too light because you'll feel that there's more bass in the song than there actually is. So finding a sweet spot in the room that works is a good start. So that graphic there, 60-60-60, try that out and just sit and listen and reference back. So as Finley said, room treatment. Really important, and it's also totally different to room isolation. So obviously if you're isolating your room, that is to stop obviously sound getting in and sound getting out. That's a totally different thing to room treatment. Now there's a little graphic here. This is taken from GIK's website. You can see there, I mean, it's not an accurate waveform obviously, but it's showing that, you know, the bottom end, which is always more difficult to treat in a room, regardless of whether you've spent 50 quid or £5 million on the room, it's the bass end that's always more difficult to treat. So a treated room, you've got a little bit there in the bottom end that's not accurate, but obviously as you go up the frequency range, it becomes a lot more accurate and you get a lot less kind of erratic information. So hot tip, GIK acoustics, obviously we'll share the presentation afterwards. But if you go onto their website, these guys are very good, very fair. They're friends of ours as well. But if you look on their website, there is a lot of kind of room treatment guides. You can basically design your room on there. You can kind of fill that in and it will give you an idea of kind of basically free advice in terms of what you can do. And then obviously the idea is that, you know, you may want to buy some room treatment from these guys. It will help you out quite a lot. So that's a good one to check out, and I would recommend speaking to GIK or at least looking at the website, because there's information on there for people that are just starting all the way up to, you know, mixed professionals. So both, if you're using headphones and obviously speakers, using a combination of room and headphones can help inform mixed choices. As we said already, Finley, you're already doing that, and it's just going to give you like a more kind of, just going to give you more information to work with basically to find out how accurate you are. Reference back on AirPods, headphone speakers, laptops. As I've said, the vast majority of music is listened to on these devices now. And, you know, being somebody that's very much into audio, you know, you want to hear things in its greatest form. But looking at it from a client point of view, this is the first place it needs to perform is on these type of devices before anything else, because that's how we digest music, obviously, these days. You don't need to spend a fortune. Train your ears. So this is important. Obviously, if you're working with a set of speakers, the best thing to do, I would say, is to reference back to tracks that you've known probably all your life. I don't think it's a particular, I don't particularly love the song, but I use Eminem, Superman. It's something I've known for the last 20-odd-year-old record, and it's just an incredible mix. So whether I'm using, you know, HS7s, which are the speakers on the outside, or the Amphions, or I'm in somebody else's room, the first thing I'll do is I'll listen to that song, and I'll be able to understand from that, because I know where the bass sits in the song, I know where the snare is, I know how far back and forth the vocal is in the mix. I can listen to that room and it almost calibrates my head. So referencing is really useful. Obviously, I'm going to say you buy the best quality speakers that you possibly can, but really, a lot of people make the mistake of spending a fortune on gear and don't actually treat the room. So what you've effectively doing is putting a load of equipment in a room that's not going to actually give you the benefit of the amount of money that you spent. So room treatment, I would say, is probably the most important thing. Obviously, if we can't afford that, if you're not in a position to budget for that, then a decent pair of headphones is probably going to be your cheapest option. But use both. Use all the tools that you've got available to you is basically what I'm trying to say. So before you start setting up your stall, obviously I'm looking at this from the basis that you're trying to go out as a commercial mix engineer. Let's say you've spent a load of time and you feel pretty comfortable with it. Maybe you'll start off like, I did, you start mixing your own material, and then, you sit in there with other people and watch them mix, and then you start to build up, and then you get to a point where, you're starting to be able to charge for it, because you hopefully be getting to the point where you're, busy enough to be able to do that, and you get kind of, a demand enough for you to do that as well. So name your price. So how do we do that? How would you think that you would be able to come to the right price for your services? Any ideas on that at all? Okay, so the way that works, there's lots of different ways you can do it. For me, the way that I kind of tend to price myself is based on my surroundings. So we live in Nottingham, and a lot of the client work that I do for mixing is artists in Nottingham, which doesn't necessarily mean that, they haven't got a budget to do it. But when you're working with developing artists, there's a certain amount of money that you can kind of charge as a headroom without kind of, how can I put it, pricing yourself out of the game. Now, that said, you've got to believe in yourself as well. You need to know that you are worth what you are charging. And that might be something that kind of progresses as you start up, or you start to go up the chain. Obviously, as demand increases and your skill increases as well, you can start to charge more money for it, because you're going to have less time to work. And what you want to make sure is that you're not kind of cutting corners in terms of the time you're spending on mixes. So, it's great if you've got a crazy workload, but if you're charging 50 quid a mix and you're trying to do 10 a day, one, your quality is not going to increase. Two, you're going to get knackered. And three, you really need to start looking at probably increasing your price, so you can balance the amount of time that you're spending working on music. Client expectations, really important. This is something that can get you in a sticky situation very quickly. It's okay going, all right, cool, I'll mix your song. It's going to cost X amount of money to do that. Boom, off you go. But if you haven't kind of set certain conditions in place before you start with that, you're going to have an issue potentially. And what we'll get into this a little bit later on, but it's talking about kind of making sure you're getting the right files, making sure that you know what the time frame is, making sure what the delivery criteria is, because as it happens, mixing, it's an art form in itself, obviously, and it's also subjective. So you might deliver the wickedest mix in the world, and the client might say, yeah, but I want the snare to be screaming loud. And you'll go, okay, which means then you're going to have to go back and do a mix revision. So to get it over the line, you need to anticipate the fact that there may be revisions on there. You might not agree with what the client wants, but as we said at the very start, it's what the client wants. That's what you're trying to deliver. So the expectation, you need to give yourself enough time to be able to make sure that you deliver that mix, and then also leave some time for revisions. You also want to make sure the client's got all the files, because what you'll get sometimes is, bro, I need this mix. I'm shooting a video next week. Can you do it for me? Yeah, cool. You get to the point where it's coming to the mix, and then half the files are missing, and it turns out the producer's Fruity Loops, his laptop's blown up, so he can't get them. So then you're in a position where you might have already taken that person's money, you might have budgeted the time for it, and then there might be an issue with it. Or last minute, another thing which happens regularly, a client will kind of have a change of heart and go, oh, I need to re-record that 8-bar in the middle because I don't like it. And then they're looking at trying to book a session to come and do that, or they're going to get somebody else to do the vocals. So make sure that you consider all of these things, and there's always going to be more things that are going to come up because that's just the way of the world, and it's a learning experience. But as you learn from the interactions that you have with your clients, make sure that you add that into your kind of expectations for you, and also make sure that your client is obviously aware of what's going on, because what you don't want to do is take somebody's money and then start having surprises down the line, because that's going to get sticky, and you don't want that. You want a peaceful life, hopefully. I know I do anyway. So what are you mixing? This is the other thing which might be able to inform you in terms of how much you're charging for it. Are you doing kind of instrumentals and vocals? And when I say that, you've got the, you know, somebody's coming with a beat they've ripped off YouTube, or it may be their producer, like I said, their laptop's blown up and they haven't got the stems, they've only just got what we call the 2-track, which is the instrumental, and then you're mixing vocals over that. That may inform your decision in terms of how much you're charging for a mix, because it gives you less options on it. And it also may be something that you need to discuss with the client in terms of expectations, because the quality of the instrumental that you're given may be terrible. And at that point, you need to make a decision as to whether you're going to take that job on and put your name on it, or whether you go back and say, look, this is not worthwhile. Maybe you should go and buy the stems, because a lot of people will take the instrumental and then they've got all the tags on it if they've ripped it from YouTube or if it's from BeatStars or whatever, because they don't want to spend the money on the stems. You've got to be honest. I think the best way to operate is to be honest and to be truthful with your client base. Don't tell them you can do something that you can't. Basically, just make sure, you know, they know what they're getting themselves into, and you're able to actually perform the job. Because paying people money back or spending time on a job, and if they're not happy and then having to refund people, nobody wants that. That's a waste of your time and money, and it could also sully the relationship with the person that you're working with. And furthermore, you might not even want to have a relationship with that person. What you'll find sometimes, you know, when you're working with new artists and developing artists, they aren't obviously very experienced in terms of how to handle the music business. So they might not be really aware of what they want from you. They might say mix a song down, but ultimately that might already be mixed and they might just want it mastering. So check in with the people that you're working with and understand obviously what you're dealing with before you get into it. So all the types of mixes, obviously you've got stem mixes, which, you know, you've got all the parts separate at that point. So you'll have, you know, your kick, your snare, your bass, your guitar, your keys, your vocals, your backing vocals, harmonies, all that lot. And as you can imagine, that's going to give you a lot more scope to develop and, you know, to deliver an amazing mix. But at the same time, it's going to take you more time, and it can potentially obviously cause you more problems. So you're going to want to maybe understand a different price structure for the stem mixes to what the instrumental mixes are. And then furthermore, after that, the client may want stem groups. They might not just want the mix down of the song. They might want you to then, after you've mixed it, go back and then go, okay, well, I want to do a stem master, which is something that's becoming more popular now, whereby you're delivering, you know, groups of stems to a mastering engineer rather than just delivering the, you know, the 2-track, the mixed down version. So it's really important to understand that, you know, that's going to take you time. Are you going to charge the client a file fee for doing that? Some projects that I've done, you know, I did a project for a guy called Marinja, and he's a really, really talented guy, super, super tight with harmonies, but he's, you know, you're talking probably like 90 to 100 track count on each of the songs that he's doing, probably 70 of those are vocals. He's then coming back and asking me to deliver, you know, groups of stems, so he can then, he's trying out different mastering engineers. He's going quite serious with it. I think it's through a label, I'm not exactly sure. But then if I'm going to do that, if you've got a project so big, that might take me half a day for that. So you need to charge, you know, according to your time, and don't be shy to charge for your time, because it's important, let's face it. And genre is obviously also important. You can sit there and go, okay, yeah, I'll mix whatever. But the whole concept of working with, you know, say garage rock stuff or post-punk stuff or hip-hop stuff or classical stuff or reggae stuff, all of those different genres, they sound different. We mix the drums very differently and the bass very differently for different genres. So it's important to know that you're kind of up to the task of doing that. For me, I'm happy to mix other projects because I've been doing it for a long time in terms of other genres, but obviously my forte is black music, rap music, drill, trap, grime, and electronic stuff. So 9 times out of 10, I'm going to work in that field because I'm the most confident in it. But then also, having spent a time around a lot of other mix engineers that are incredibly good, and I do a lot of research, and also it's nice to kind of work outside of your comfort zone. I will do that, but make sure that you can deliver. I mean, don't maybe go and mix a rock track, like a heavy rock track, like you would a rap track, because the kick drum and the bass, your band's probably not going to be very happy about where you put that. So just be aware of different genres and whether you are actually able and ready to go forward and you know, deliver that. I'm absolutely boiling, by the way. I've had to turn the aircon off, so apologies if I'm starting to do this. File types, minimum requirements. So this, as a mix engineer, will be the bane of your life. I'm sorry to say this doesn't change as you go up the food chain. I've sat in sessions with top people, top engineers, top mixers, top artists, and I've still sat there while, you know, the A&R guys going, oh, bro, we need that 2 decibel up version of the main vocal. Have you got it? We're sitting in the mix now. And then it's like, can't find the file. So this is something that, you know, before you even enter into doing a project, it's better for you to get the stems sent through to you to make sure that they are sitting in the way that, you know, they should be. And when I say that, I'm talking about things like bit rate. So basically bit rate is almost like, imagine the higher the bit rate, the higher the quality of you watching like a, you know, a HD TV or a smart TV or OLED TV or whatever. So the lower the bit rate, you're looking like an old analog box that's got an, it's got like the aerial on top. And, you know, a higher bit rate will give you kind of more depth to kind of add your feel to. That said, I would say that the majority of people that I work with still industry professionals are working at 24-bit, 48 kilohertz. Now, a lot of the interfaces, even ones that aren't very expensive, you can go up to like, you know, 96 or even double that. But really and truly, for the people that I know and for what I'm doing, nobody's working at that kind of level. Even doing like virtuoso classical stuff for massive record labels like Warner. I had a conversation with somebody the other week. They was getting stems sent at, you know, double the 98 kilohertz rate, which is just killing the processing on the computer. And nobody can really hear that topology as in the, you know, the difference of it. And so, yeah, I would say 48/24 is a good place to be. So where was we? Naming conventions. This is probably going to be your biggest nightmare because sometimes, and it's difficult as a engineer as well as a recording engineer, you might be in with an artist. So you've got a label session, A&R sitting there, clock's ticking. They want to get off and get on to wherever they're going next. Oh yeah, bro, can you just send me all the stems? But I need them now. So they want to have the stems in their hand before they leave the session. So obviously, if you're an engineer and you know what you're doing and you're organized, you're going to be naming all those channels as you go. Just to break it down a bit more. So obviously you're recording stuff. So you might be there with a load of stems that somebody else has given you in the session. But then you're recording obviously your main vocals, your backing vocals, your stabs, your ad-libs, whatever. So for me, I'm going to be naming all those things. And when I print the stems, I'll be printing all of them from the very first bar, no matter whether it's one hi-hat, 2 minutes into the song, print from one all the way through to the end. Because as a mix engineer, if you don't kind of get that anchor at the start of the song and the names aren't right for each of the instruments, like often you'll see, you know, rec 1 or take 1 or just channel 1, audio 1, audio 2. And if you've got a 96 channel mix and nothing's named, you're going to be sitting there for a considerable amount of time trying to go through that and figure out what it is. Again, this is all costing you time and effort. So what you want to try and do is make sure that people's naming conventions are right. And the way that you can avoid a lot of headaches is by checking the files before you take it on. So what I will do in a situation now, you gain an instinct for this kind of thing often, but I'll have a look at the files before I think about taking any money off anybody and make sure everything's ready. And if it's not, I'll fire it back, say get it sorted, and then I'll mix the song. So that's something to really consider, and it will take, you're going to come across, that's just a fact with mixing. Time planning for you and your clients. So what you want to do is make sure you're giving yourself plenty of time. Often, you know, people are quite impatient in this game. They want things yesterday. But remember, that's their time planning. That's not you. So if you're saying to somebody, yes, I'll mix your song, but I can do it here, but give me a week. So it gives you time to do the mix without them stressing or pressurizing you, because at the end of the day, if you're pressurized, you're not going to deliver to the best of your ability. And so if you make sure that there's an understanding of that before you even start, then you've got something to go back to the client and say, listen, you gave me a week to do this, so let me have my week. It can't happen before that. This is when I'm going to do it. So make sure you stick to your guns, because all that's going to do is cause you stress. You're not going to deliver a good mix, and your client's going to get annoyed. They might get annoyed anyway, depending on who it is. That's just how it works sometimes. So yeah, time planning is important. Make sure you give yourself plenty of time, and make sure the expectation is there, because often, like I say, clients might want to be shooting a video or be trying to get things up on, you know, digital download within hours sometimes. So make sure that people know what the situation is with that, because otherwise it's going to be disappointing for them and you're going to probably waste your time. Right, so setting up a mix organization. So what's important here? I'm jumping straight into it, because how we're doing for time. Wow, 20 minutes to go. Right, so I've just kind of covered this, so I don't need to really go into it. Listen to the files first. Obviously, you're going to be looking at the names of the songs. You're going to see if everything's been printed from the start of the song. These things are very important, but also have a listen to them in terms of whether you feel that, you know, they've been recorded at a decent level. We'll get into gain stages in a minute. But yeah, are they loud enough? Is there loads of distortion on there? Are the files covered in effects when you've asked them for dry files? Stuff like that. So put yourself in a decent position before you even take on the job is what I would say. So is the source material workable? One thing that we find often is somebody go, yeah, I've got a WAV. If we're talking about if we're working like an instrumental and then you're mixing the vocals over the top of it. So not necessarily a stem mix, an instrumental and vocal mix type thing. You'll get somebody saying, yeah, I've got the WAV, but then you'll listen to it and you'll find out that the upsampling doesn't work. And what they've done is they've taken an MP3 that they've ripped from somewhere and then converted that converted it to a WAV. That will never, ever improve the quality of the audio, no matter what anybody tells you, whatever it says online, it's not true. So you've got to make sure that the quality of the material that you've got is worthwhile to work from. And you may end up having to work with an MP3. You might. It sounds crazy. And for me, like it's, you know, I'm not going to say as far as sacrilegious, but, you know, sometimes it's like, well, there's an MP3 2-track that I've got here and the guy wants the vocals on it. You may have to work with it. Now, obviously, you've got the option to say no, but then say, for example, it's like, right, well, this is an artist that's going somewhere. He doesn't fully understand how this works yet, but I'm gonna give this a go because it's probably going to put a decent credit against my name. But just make sure that you manage expectations on that. Yeah, so what if I'm giving an MP3? You've got to, like I said, you've just got to make that call. And you will know if it's a really bad quality MP3, like a 128 kilobit, it's just going to sound like somebody's rustling some foil while they're playing the song. Anything like that, personally, I would just throw that back because it's never going to sound good. And then when they play that to all their homies, they'll be like, well, who's mixed this? It's like, oh yeah, this guy. It's got nothing to do with you at all. The source material wasn't right. Send that back. So are all stamps printed from 111? I've already kind of covered this. I hope that's self-explanatory. Anything that anybody doesn't understand, please just pull me up. I'm trying to just keep it really kind of simple and polite. And that's not to be condescending because I'm sure there's some people that are more experienced than others here. But I'm just trying to make it so everybody can kind of understand what I'm saying. So anything you don't get, please give me a shout and I will try and clarify. Correct sample rate. So most of your DAWs now will be able to convert a sample rate without problems, but sometimes for whatever reason, you'll get gremlins. Computers aren't perfect and sometimes there's an issue with that. So as I said before, I work at 48 kilohertz, 24-bit. If somebody sends you a sample rate of 44.1, sometimes I've had it like this where some of the samples are 44.1, some are 48. Your DAW should ask you what you want to do with it, but you're not going to gain any quality by doing this from the audio. But if it's 44.1 and you work at 48, definitely convert it because that will give you more options in terms of the quality of the plugins that you use. It won't change the original audio. But if you're working at 48, you might as well upsample that at the start and then go through and deliver the mix at the end in 48 kilohertz. Okay, yeah, are the files named reasonably? I'm going to say 50-50 probably even now. They work, so you might have a very understanding friend that might want to help you, i.e. an assistant. I'm just about to start getting my daughter involved in this because she's taking an interest and she wants pocket money. So I'm going to get her to start naming my files for me, which is cool. But if it's you that's doing it and it's a big project, remember that's going to take you quite a lot of time if they're not named properly. Something I find as well is I know that in Fruity Loops specifically, you can have like 2 or 3 different sounds on the same mixer channel. And I know you can do that in different DAWs, but for some reason, I've had things recently where I've been given something to mix. And it's like, okay, so that's a kick drum channel. 1 minute it's a kick drum, next minute it's a synth, next minute it's a snare. And then you're like, this is a nightmare. So make sure that each stem, if it says bass, make sure it's bass. You don't want anything else on there. And kick that back to the other people and make sure that they get things delivered to you properly. And then it's just going to save you a load of time and stress. Wet and dry. So this is what people ask often. It's like, how do you want the stems? Do you want them with all the effects taken off? So the producer, he might have used some like incredibly nuts like compression to make a sound. What I always say to people is, look, send me the wet stems and the dry stems. And when I say wet and dry, that basically means one set of files with the effects on and one set of files with nothing on, that's not peaking out, that's got no reverb, EQ or whatever. So that way you've got the best of both worlds. If it's somebody that's experienced and you've worked with before, what I always say is, look, you can send the wet stems, make sure nothing's kind of peaking, so clipping, digital clipping. But if it's a creative decision, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having stuff that's got reverb and delays on it. If that's the sound that the artist or the producer or the label want, that's okay. Just make sure that it's not clipping. And reference tracks. So if they've got a specific idea of kind of how they want that to sound, you can ask them for reference tracks, and then that gives you kind of a bit of a sonic springboard, if you like, in terms of how you're working. So they might want something that's like, you know, if you listen to a lot of the wave stuff, or like Drake's before the new house record, like Drake stuff, or like Smiley, people like that. If you're into rap music, that will make sense. Obviously, the kick drums are just insanely big now. So that's come from, obviously, you know, it's inexperience that's caused this sound, really. I think it's a lot of the kind of SoundCloud stuff a while ago, like Triple X Tentacion, people like that, the sound was just incredibly distorted. But then what happens is people get used to that and they like it. So then what you're going to get is, you know, a kick drum that's massive. It's absolutely huge. But as long as that's not distorting, again, going back to what the client wants, then that's okay. You don't want them to take all the effects off and end up with this like weedy little kick drum, because all you're going to end up doing is having to recreate that and just wasting loads of time. So setting up a mix, this is the nerdy part, and I actually quite like this bit, to be honest. And this is, like I say, it's going to be my daughter's job going forward, hopefully, if she don't get bored of it. So you name the tracks clearly and arrange them by type. So this is one I've worked on in Logic. As you can see, it's quite obvious what everything is. Intro 2. This is literally just a mix that I pulled up off my laptop that I'd worked on maybe a year or two ago. I just screenshotted it, but it's very clear to see obviously what everything is on there. Color coding helps. One, you can tell what kind of sections things are. Oh my gosh, we've got 15 minutes. You can tell, obviously, by section, I will work with certain. To be honest, you should probably have a specific color, and there is kind of a kind of an industry standard. For me, I'm just working to the colors that I work. One, it makes it look less boring. Two, I can see quickly kind of what's going on, and then that can carry through into the routing. So cleaning your audio is important. As you can see on here, I've got fade files on the start and end of all of my stuff. There's lots of different ways to do this. Clip gain in Pro Tools, fade files in Logic, and then, you know, everything else. I wouldn't know how you do it, but it's you know, it doesn't take a great deal of time. What that's going to do is stop your tracks clicking and popping. And obviously, if it's a vocal, maybe they're recording ad-libs and they're doing that through the whole song. There's going to be times when they're clearing the throat, they might drop a water bottle, they might stomp the feet. You want to clear all that because that's taking up valuable headroom, which we're going to get into. So make sure you clean your audio, get it nice and neat, and then you're saving yourself headroom, and you've also, you know, you've got a neat project before you've even started. Gain staging, right? So this graphic is really boring and it looks quite, yeah, it's something that I'm not going to lie. I've garnered this from the internet, but it makes sense. So I'll explain it and have a look at this after, because I don't want to go into massive detail on the actual diagram itself. But gain staging is basically getting yourself in a start point with all the files, whether they're, you know, you don't want them to be too quiet or to be too loud. So if, say, somebody's recorded something incredibly quietly and you're having to add lots of volume to that just to get it to a decent start point, what you're going to do is introduce loads of noise, and then you're going to start having hiss, and the actual quality of that is bad. It's also bad if somebody's recorded stuff like incredibly loud and printed stems that are crazy, crazy loud. And this is why we ask for dry stems and we ask for headroom, right? Headroom is really important, because if you're getting what we call a hot file, if it's super hot, then you're going to be introducing distortion into that very, very quickly, even if you pull that down to a decent level to start. So you want files that aren't too cold and aren't too hot. I hope that makes sense. Any questions afterwards or whatever, please give me a shout. But this is incredibly important, because this is going to save you a long time. When I first started mixing, I used to struggle to understand how people managed to get things so loud. So I'd start off pushing all my faders up really high. And what you're doing is exactly the opposite, because you've only got to zero. Zero is the point you get to. That's where you're at. You can't go any further than that in the world of digital. With analog back in the day, you could go past zero and add like harmonic distortion with tape. We don't use tape anymore. So it's important to know that zero is zero and start from down here, and then gives you plenty of space to build up. Okay. Routing. I don't know how clearly explainable this screenshot is, but when I say routing, it's the same as when people saying auxiliary sends or busing things or grouping things. They all do slightly different stuff, and we don't need to really go into that now. But what it will do is it will help you routing these things into separate buses. Okay. So if you do that, the first thing, one, is going to keep it organized. So say, for example, you've got a kick, a snare, hi-hats, percussion, just 4 things, right? So you're going to create a rough balance of those 4 things. Once you've kind of got that, send that to a bus, and then that's affecting only one set of faders. Okay, so you've got all your drums in one place. Remember, obviously you can still go back to the actual input channels and tweak those, pan those, do whatever you want with it, but then if you put them into one place, then that enables you to kind of put processing on that bus, okay, rather than using, say, 4 EQs and compressors. You might still do that, but you know, if you've got a mix, sorry, a group, like a drum group, you tend to work on that on its own account, if you like, and you're going to save lots of processing doing it that way. We'll also talk more about how that works with compression in a minute. So even in that screenshot, I mean, yeah, okay, it's not really telling you a great deal. The pre-vocal bus on the left there, that's the first one. Then you can see I've got 5, 2, and 3. Yes, sorry, they're in the wrong order, but they kind of like, they send some signal to like delays and reverbs and stuff, but then it goes to 7, which is the overall kind of vocal bus. And that overall vocal bus, that's where I would do certain tweaks to it. That's my kind of, once I've got it in shape, that's when I can start to really fine tune stuff. So I hope that is explained. That's kind of self-explanatory. I know the graphic doesn't really do it justice. So yeah, the rough mix, listening to the rough and reference material. So I would always put the reference track, if you've got one, and the rough mix in the top of the arrangement, and listen through it. So listen to that first, get used to it, understand, you know, why people like it. And we'll talk more about the rough mix in a minute. So yeah, the rough mix, there we go. How to beat it. So why is a demo mix hard to beat? Anybody got any ideas relating to that? And I'm gonna have to speed up, so we've got 10 minutes. Anybody at all?
Is it because they push the levels so much, so it's not like, it's no holds barred, in it? Like, you just demo, so you're not bothered about it clipping a bit and stuff, so it's louder maybe.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. So yeah, like Ben just said, people are just, you know, the producer that's made the song initially, they're just going to want it to slap as loud as possible, because they might be trying to sell beats on YouTube. They want the mates to hear it and go, wow, that's incredibly loud. Everybody thinks louder is better. It's actually really not. But yeah, so people are used to hearing things absolutely slammed fully. Like I said before, with the Phlexx Temptation and the SoundCloud kind of stuff, people are used to that. Also, it's what they're used to hearing as it is. So regardless of how good or bad it is, they've already played that to the mates and probably listened to it in the garden like 500 times, or driven around in the car. So they're used to that. So they have an attachment to it. Now that attachment is a psychological thing. It's not necessarily a sonic thing. So this is something that's really difficult sometimes to convince your client base of. So that's why that's difficult. So rough mix, how to beat it. As we said before, a good mix is what the client wants. Understand why the client likes the rough mix. So that could be a conversation that you're having. Obviously, the best thing to do is to ask him, her, they, what they like about it. And then you can start to kind of understand it. And then obviously, if you're listening to it yourself, you can kind of make your own estimations as to kind of why that's good. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. This is the thing. So again, going back to what the client wants, if you've got a reference, if you understand the music that you're dealing with, if you understand the artist as well, you already kind of got, you know, half of the tools that you need before you've even started the mix. So I'm having all these ideas in my head before I even sit down in the room. So I've got myself psychologically in a place ready to go to work with all this stuff and all these kind of, I guess, you know, pieces of information that are useful before I've even touched the fader on the mix. This is not your song, okay? So this is something that a lot of people can struggle with. Be selfless with it. Kill the ego. It's not about you at all. It's about you delivering what they want as a client. It's not about you going, oh, okay, well, I love the way that my kick drums sound and you're going to get the kick drums the way that I do them. Okay, you can add some of your kind of nuance and your character to that, of course. But if that is totally different to what impression the artist got, you're not helping yourself. One, you're going to not give them what they want, they won't like it. And two, you're just going to annoy yourself because it's like, wow, mine's better. And it may well be that it is. You know, this is another thing. Like, you may work on stuff and you might think, okay, I've had people ask me to change things in the mix which I believe dynamically aren't accurate, or I don't like it, but I'll go, okay, ego, you go and sit over there, let me figure out how to make this sound good sonically, so when it's on Spotify it doesn't sound like rubbish, but also to give you what you want. And that might take you a little bit of time. It's a psychology, man. I know I keep saying that word, but having that kind of that understanding with your clients is really, really important. You know, it's sometimes difficult to get to a place where they want it, but then also as a professional engineer, you know, sonically that it's actually okay also. Be patient. You don't have to, sometimes I've been sent rough mixes in the past when I've been less experienced. I'm like, that's actually quite amazing. How am I going to get past that? Don't do that. Just, sit and get used to it. Take time. And this is why I said earlier on, make sure you give yourself plenty of time to get the job done. Have patience. Sometimes you might have to zero a mix. You might get halfway through it. Sometimes if you're halfway through a mix and you've spent a day or two on it even, or you might know sooner as your instincts grow and the more you do it, you might know sooner it's not working. Zero it. What's the point? Why fight something that's not working? Zero that, start again and go at it. And the more times you do stuff like that, the more experience you're going to get as well. So be patient and don't beat yourself up, man. It takes time. So find the sonic balance, pretty self-explanatory. In terms of a mix, you want it to sit in a nice field. When I say field, you want the drums and the synthesizer and the pianos and the vocals to all feel like they're surrounding you. You don't want it to be too narrow where everything's all mono and just squashed down. That's not going to feel good. So find a basic sonic balance in your head. I'm talking about before you even start. So the sonic balance of the rough, figure out what that's doing, and then go back, put that into put what you know about the rough mix into what you're doing, but make sure it's done sonically accurately. So things aren't too wide necessarily. If you do that, you're going to have issues with phase, or sometimes when you're working, you're playing that music on a huge PA system. Not very often now, but sometimes things are, even though they're stereo, they're channeled out in mono. And then sometimes if it's too wide, you're going to totally lose that. Older iPhones and stuff, they work in mono. You're going to lose all the width in the mix. Okay, so Kenny B says, don't overthink shit. So super simple, but it's very true. And it's so easy to do that, especially when you care about it, or if you're just kicking off as a mix engineer and you've taken your first money from somebody, you're like, wow, I need to really get this right. Yes, you do, but don't stress yourself about it, because if you do, you're not going to be relaxed and you're probably not going to deliver the mix that you want. So don't overthink stuff. So, right, the mix, starting off, relax. There are no rules to the process. So pick a point. Now, a lot of people start with drums. Some people start with vocals. There are no rules to it whatsoever. You work with what is instinctive to you. For many years, I used to start with drums because I love drums. I love working on them, and it's probably the thing that I'm most confident in. Now, it depends on what it is. I might start work on the vocals first, whatever feels right, but there's no rules to it. So don't listen to, there's a lot of people that say you have to mix in a certain way. It's not true. You find your own process. So find a rough balance quickly. So push some faders, whether you're using kind of an actual mixing desk or whether you're clicking and pushing with your mouse, just get a decent balance. Once you've routed everything, it's all sitting there in your DAW. You've got obviously your fader screen, your mixer screen. Push things around. Don't take too long, maybe 5-10 minutes. Run through the song once or twice, just get a rough balance of it. And that's a good guide that before you do anything with processing whatsoever, that will give you a base. Make a task list. So when I'm doing that, when I'm pushing faders, I've got my notepad next to me all the time. I'll be like, oh gosh, that vocal sounds really sibilant. I've got to sort that out. Oh my gosh, that bass is distorting there. Oh, he's left some clicks in at this point that I might have missed when I was cleaning it up. Make sure you make a list. Well, this works for me anyway, because that way I know I'm not going to forget anything. And as I'm working through the mix, any ideas that I have that I'm not, specifically working on at that particular time, write them down and come back to them, because I think it's important to try and be singular, work on one thing at a time in the actual particular mix. Breaks, regular breaks, man. Ear fatigue is a big thing. It's not a joke. I can't believe we've got 5 minutes left. Ear fatigue's crazy. So I don't know what the science is on this, but I think, within an hour, you've lost about 30% of your high-end frequency, like range of your hearing, even at regular levels. So get out of the room. When I'm mixing a song, I'm moving. I'll probably sit there for maybe half an hour at a time, an hour at a push. I'm going to go for a walk around for 5 minutes, but not too long. Just get away, or even go somewhere else, listen to nothing, sit outside, listen to the birds, whatever, or listen to another song just to give yourself like a palate cleanser. Remove distractions, get your phone away from you. Anybody around you at that time, you don't want to be having conversations, be in your zone, man. Do you know what I mean? Don't start a mix where you already know 10 minutes down the line you need to go and eat some food or whatever. You know what I mean? Make sure you give yourself that space. It's almost like a meditation, you know what I mean? Looking at it from kind of a hippie point of view, you need to be in that zone fully and not distracted, because you're not going to compute everything properly if you're not. Maintain headroom. I'm going to keep going on about this because it's really important. Louder doesn't necessarily mean better. And blind test. When you're working with plugins, you might look at the interface, it might look all colorful and bright. You might press on and think, oh my gosh, I've just spent 250 quid on this new compressor plugin. It's going to sound great. But often what you're doing is just introducing loads of volume to stuff. So you need to make sure that you're leveling that out. So you're not monitoring what you're working on at a higher level than what the signal came in at. And also don't be distracted, blind test it, close your eyes, listen to it, click the button on and off, on and off, on and off. Is it on? Is it not? You know, understand that. There's loads of funny memes out there where people say, you know, they've been tweaking a compressor for an hour and it's actually not even engaged. And trust me, I've seen that. Right, the mix, broad strokes, panning to create a stereo image is important. Here's like a little cheat sheet. It's not, like I say, there's no rules to this, but it's a good kind of jump off. I'm not going to go into it because I'm running out of time desperately. That's there in the presentation. Have a look. That's not a bad guide to start off with. EQ, cut before you boost. At the Elementz Studios, we kind of covered this a little bit. What this enables you to do is take away anything that you don't need. There's no point boosting and coloring stuff that you don't want in a mix. So this, by the looks of it, yeah, there's some issues in the kind of like low mids area. You've got some kind of boxy stuff at like, I don't know, maybe like, don't know, 800 hertz or something like that. So anything that's unappealing in that mix, part by part, go through that. And if it's not sounding right, get rid of it. You don't need those frequencies because otherwise you're just going to be boosting stuff that already sounds bad. And again, you're losing this variable headroom that I keep talking about. Roll off as well. So the bottom end, you don't need a lot of the bottom end and you don't need anything really below 20 hertz in a mix, unless it's super, super crazy and it's a club mix and you want to, you know, you're on like the world's most amazing sound system. Anything in general below 20 you don't need, and anything that's not bass related or kick drum related, you can roll off like from what, I don't know, maybe like 150 down, but on a gentle curve. That'll stop all the rumbling, all the feet bushing around in the booth, all the kind of, yeah, just room sounds, just all that stuff is just dead information. You don't need it. So get rid of it before you even start. Frequency range, starting point. This is a lot of information. You're going to find loads of these on the internet, but they're really, really useful because what they'll do is they'll tell you kind of roughly where things sit within a frequency spectrum as a guide. So you can start to look at, I don't know if you can see it clearly. I don't know if you guys are on phones or laptops or whatever, but rudely, they haven't done this breakdown for the female vocal, but on the male vocal, it's saying fullness 120, boominess 200 to 240, presence, sibilance, which is all the horrible SE stuff, that's at 7.5 to 10K. This kind of stuff is really useful and you can train yourself with that. I would take, you know, take a recording, whether it's yours or your mates or it's a commercial thing, whatever, get a stem and just sit and listen through those frequencies. Just, you know, take an EQ band and sweep through it and find those points and you'll start to understand where problem areas are. And you'll start to find trends in that, which it'll help you to kind of work quickly by doing that. And it'll give you more confidence as well. It's basically ear training. Compression, what is it? I'm running out of time so bad. Right, so it's a stupid thing. It's off the internet, but it actually kind of makes sense. Compression is something that people get wrong so easily and it's misunderstood. It's not that complicated, but it looks it, okay? So the compressor is like your mother. Threshold, that's the level she asks you to turn it down by. So that's your threshold before the compressor starts. The ratio, that's how much you turn the volume down by after she shouts at you. So that's how much kind of you're letting through the compressor threshold. The attack is how fast you react. That's how fast the compressor is going to jump in and turn that down. And the release, how fast you turn the volume back down as soon as she closes the door. So that is how quickly your compressor lets go of compressing that signal. So these are some ratios. I don't know how mathematical you guys are. This is something that I can't lie, I still find this confusing, but it's actually not really that difficult to understand. It's just something that I find confusing. So the threshold, okay, so that's the point where the compressor is going to hit. So a 2:1 compression ratio, every 2 decibels that goes above the threshold, 1 decibel will go through. 4:1, every 4 decibels that goes past the threshold, 1 decibel is going to go through. So as you can see, you go down the chart, you're squashing the audio more and more. So you're compressing it more, basically. So yeah, that's based very, very basics on how ratios work. So moving on. So types of compressors, VCA compressors, voltage controlled amplifiers, basically, that's what the actual compressor box uses. Smooth and reliable. FET compressors like the one behind me, 1176, which I use on vocals, as I've said all the time, a million times to everybody. That's the one that was used on Michael Jackson's Thriller record. It's super quick, lightning fast, and it's really great on drums, but you can also slow that down so it sounds very desirable on things like vocals. FET, yeah, so that's a FET, so field effect transistor. Optical compressors literally use like a light dependent resistor, which tells them when to turn on and when to turn off. They're usually very gentle and musical sounding. A tube actually uses vacuum tubes for dynamic control, and they're quite forgiving on transients. Transients being how quickly, you know, so the start of a note, how a note comes in and goes out again. And if you want to learn more, there's something that I read actually that's quite useful. Produce Like a Pro, and it kind of just goes through all of those things that I've said there. Now, what's important, I know I'm out of time really, but plugins work in the same way, they're designed in the same way as the equipment that they emulate. So it's quite important to kind of have a basic understanding of this, because different compressors, whether it's a plugin or whether it's a real hardware unit, they will operate in the same way. So you've got to try and understand a little bit about how they work and what they do, and you'll get better results out of them for doing that. So why are we using compression? So imagine you've got a singer and they're singing quite quietly through the song, and then you get to the crescendo and they're really kind of giving it full beans. You're going to find a huge waveform at that point. So you might only want to compress that section to bring it down to the level of the other ones. There's a million other uses for it. So smoothing out the dynamic range, like I've just said, adding character to a sound, because some compressors just inherently sound beautiful without actually even doing any compression, i.e. this guy behind me and a lot of the other ones that you can get in plugin form. And you can use them as an effect, obviously, to slam the signal, like I was talking about with the kick drums. You can use them to duck things, so side chaining, which is a whole other story, and then harmonic distortion, which is not necessarily a bad thing if you use it correctly. And it also glues things together. I don't know whether your guys' screens covered this, but that's an SSL G series compressor in the corner. That's a VCA compressor. It's very forgiving, but it's used a lot of times to glue groups together, so drums, vocal groups, etc., because it sounds so musical and it doesn't add too much kind of coloration to the sound. It just works. That's something that I'd recommend. There's free emulations of that. The Waves one, I think that's often on offer for like 30 quid if you look for it. Yeah, my mix this way, and I'm sorry, I know I'm running over now. I'll be as quick as I can now. But just to kind of impart a little bit about what I do, some of the really basic stuff, which probably will save you time. Don't get lost in solos and mutes, right? So you can sit there and listen to a mix. You're better to be mixing with all things playing. Obviously, you're going to want to solo things just to check out, certain nuances and if there's a problem. But try and mix your song with everything in. If you sit there and do the sickest drums in the world, right? You're just working on the drums for an hour and nothing else is playing. That might sound great, but then what if you've got this booming kick drum? You add the 808 in and all the bottom end stuff, or if you've got a vocalist with a real baritone with a low tone, that's all going to get lost. So you're wasting your time. Get a balance with everything in. Like I said, when you first start, get a rough balance of it. And then as you progress through your mix, don't be soloing and muting stuff. Do that as little as possible. Try and stay away from that, because this will inform you as to what's actually happening in the song and how all the different channels kind of interact with each other. Again, maintain headroom. I've said that more than anything else today. That's because it's so important. And it's okay to get lost. Now, 10,000 hours, this is like obviously a lot of people quoting this saying that, whatever you're trying to be good at, you have to put 10,000 hours into something. All right. So it takes time. When it takes time, don't be discouraged. It's okay to get lost. Just keep doing it. If you've got a passion for it, you're going to be able to find your way with it. Okay. Choose your weapons. So the EQs, the compressors, the reverbs, the dynamics processors that you pick, choose them because they work for you. Okay. Not necessarily because they cost 300-400 quid for a plugin. I sometimes will use stuff that's stock that works better for certain tasks than other ones. Don't be a snob with it and don't get gassed by the fact that, everybody else in the world uses it. That might not work for you, okay? So pick your tools wisely. Level, headroom. I've said it again. I've said it twice in the same slide, because if you lose that headroom on your mix bus on the way out, which is where you're printing things from, you lose that headroom there. Number one, your mastering engineer can't do anything with it. Number two, you're cheating yourself because it's always got to come back below zero anyway. Things always obviously sound better, louder, inherently, okay? To our ears, it's like, okay, it's going to sound great, but it's not like that. You've got to maintain a certain level. Furthermore, listen at a decent level. I wouldn't advise necessarily listening too loud when you're mixing, because you're just going to introduce more ear fatigue. I know there's loads of kind of Hollywood stories about, Dr. Dre mixing at ear splitting levels when nobody else can kind of be in the room. But I bet his tinnitus now is kidding him. So yeah, in my opinion, yeah, just keep it at a decent level and you'll be able to work for longer without getting fatigued. Maintain focus. So A/B referencing, that can be like I have my Superman track if I'm checking out the room. It can be obviously the material that you've been given from the person that's wanting you to mix the song. It could be one of your mixes that you really like, or like I say, it could be whatever. Massive Attack, people like that, they're really good for referencing, I find, cross genre. Always stay learning, network, read and research. So, get yourself online, talk to other people that are doing this, don't be shy. Some of the best advice I've been given, I've made friends with people just by nerding out, talking about speakers and stuff like that online. garnered relationships that have lasted decades, and I've been in rooms with them and they've gone on to do amazing things, and I've taken stuff from that, you know. So it's about sharing and staying humble, man. I would say there's always everybody can learn something from somebody. Read and research stuff, plugins versus hardware. And I touched on this before when I was talking about, you know, the 1176 there that I've got behind me, the real one. The character of the plugin version will be emulating what that does, because it's supposed to try and sound like that. Okay, so if you work with that in a certain way that that is against the way that that compressor has been built, say if you have a super fast like release time on it, it'll bug out. If you use the real one, it will bug out. If you use it on the plugin, it will do the same, and it will distort. It will sound horrible. So go and look at the user guides. They're all up there for free. Even if you haven't bought the plugin yet or the piece of equipment, you can go and download the user guide and you'll learn a load of stuff about it. And if you're a nerd like me, I love that kind of stuff. So sit on your mix, yeah? Take time away from it. So before you deliver it, I would say don't just, you know, don't press print on that and then send it straight to the client, okay? Give it a day or two. Don't listen to it at all for at least 24 hours and then go back. And within the first 5 minutes of listening to that mix for the first time, after giving it 24 hours, that's going to inform you of what you need to change, trust me. And then listen to lots of music, lots of different genres, try to understand it, listen to it on different sources. That's going to train your ears and you'll be able to find out kind of what works, and you can, you know, start to kind of utilize or try to emulate what other people are doing out there that are doing a great job of mixing. And so last one, resources. Check out Pensado's place. That's a really good one. This is a dude that he got into the game really, really late. I think he's like in his mid-40s before he even started. And he's just the most lovely, humble guy, and also incredibly talented. You know, this guy's worked with everybody from Michael Jackson to Mariah Carey to whoever you want to call. And he does interviews in different sections, and he's just inquisitive still, even though he's top of the game now. Like, you know, I don't know what he charges for a mix these days, but he stays humble and he stays looking for new ideas. And I love that guy. I've watched that now. I've watched it for years, and you'll learn a lot from checking that guy out. So Pensado's place, it's like kind of like a web kind of documentary thing. It's on YouTube and it's free. Pure Mix, 25 quid a month. It's expensive, but there's loads of great resources on there. Amazing stuff. And you can also download stems and do mixes of like massive records. Like you can take a Justin Bieber record and do your own version of it if you want. So it's expensive, but it's useful. It's amazing. And they also give you free plugins. Sound on Sound is a magazine. It's online. I've been reading that for years. I've learned so much from that. Mix with the Masters. That's also like Pure Mix. It's more kind of interview based, and then more kind of breaking down mixes, like famous mixes. There's a good one on there recently. A friend of ours, MSM, he broke down his mix with James Blake and Slow Tie. It's really good. And then manufacturers user guides, like I've said. And that's it. That's the end of the show. Sorry that I started talking so quickly towards the end. I'm 10 minutes over, but that concludes what I was trying to say. You probably want to go because it's after time. But if you did want to ask any questions, or you want to talk about anything, or even if you wanted to send me your mixes to listen to, I'm happy to kind of do that. And, you know, I'm not going to critique say it's good or bad, but I can maybe, you know, if you want to send me something through the group chat, then you're welcome to do that as well. So thank you very much. I hope that was not too boring, and I hope it made sense. Yeah, thank you for having me.